The most destructive fire in Colorado history. Then a year-and-a-half wait. Today, some answers. Investigators say the Marshall Fire was actually two fires that became one. The fire started on a religious sect's property and from a faulty Xcel power line.
The first started on a residential property at 5325 Eldorado Springs Drive, shortly after 11 a.m. Further investigation determined that the most likely cause of the second fire was hot particles discharged from an Xcel Energy power line.
That's Boulder County Sheriff Curtis Johnson, who lost his own home in the fire, one of 1,000 homes that burned in a fire that also killed 2 Coloradans. Despite the damage, despite the loss of life, Boulder County DA Michael Dougherty says he will not be bringing criminal charges for the 2 fires. The first ignition point was on the property owned by the religious sect called the 12 Tribes. Investigators say a fire they had burning there 6 days before the Marshall Fire reignited on December 30th. Heavy winds pushed that fire east, where investigators say it eventually merged with a second fire that they say was likely sparked by an Xcel power line. Investigators say they cannot completely rule out the possibility that it was an underground coal mine fire that was the second ignition point instead of the Xcel line, but they say that is not likely. Marshall Zellinger kind of specializes in asking Xcel Energy questions that the utility would rather not answer. This is the first time, Marshall, though, that you've been asking them about issues of life and death.
Usually it's about our bills, finances, money, something like that. But in this case, with 2 people who passed away in the fire and people impacted, it's a very serious question. Last year we got viewer video sent to us showing an arcing power line over Highway 93 here, kind of like on those lines where those barbell looking things are. That is not what investigators are talking about when they reference Xcel's cause of the fire. Instead, it's the 3 power lines that go from pole to pole. And there's one down there where that bird is sitting. The far left power line was not attached to where it was supposed to be. This photo evidence from the Marshall Fire investigation shows a hanging power line, not touching the ground, just floating. It turns out a viewer who shared fire video with us last year caught the same thing.
Oh, wow.
Edward Harrell was shooting video of the smoke plume at 12:05 p.m. on December 30th, 2021, when he captured that same power line no longer attached to the top of the pole. Investigators believe that caused hot aluminum particles to start a second fire separate from the 12 Tribes fire.
Seems more probable and more likely that it was the Xcel wire, as opposed to embers from 2,000 feet away, or the coal seam vents that caused the fire. I recognize that Xcel may not share that view.
Xcel does not. In part of a statement provided to us, the company wrote, "We strongly disagree with any suggestion that Xcel Energy's power lines caused the second ignition." It goes on to say the investigators' analyses are flawed and their conclusions are incorrect. Though part of the investigation references a text message from one Xcel lineman to his manager saying something to the effect of, "I think our lines may have started this fire east of El Dorado, just for your situational awareness."
I feel that somebody should be responsible for the people that died.
George Kumpfner lived near Sagamore in Superior. He lost his home and he lost precious memories.
My videos of the boys playing ball, that's gone. And I can't get it back, no way.
He got an attorney last year to file a lawsuit against Xcel seeking class action status. That was before today's announcement by investigators that Xcel shares blame.
Well, I think it gave our lawsuit some steroids.
Attorney James Avery believes the people he represents suing Xcel should be entitled to double the value of the homes they lost.
I don't think they're going to be able to keep the same profit margin if they have to pay damages to these victims.
And a second class action lawsuit was filed this morning against Xcel. I should point out, investigators did not notice the thing about the power line originally because Xcel repaired that line, and investigators say they don't believe Xcel was doing anything to cover anything up, but rather just get power back on to people who needed it immediately after the fire and when that snowstorm came, Kyle.
But prevented investigators from taking a look because they obviously went out there and did the fix. Again, Marshall, I see they're saying that Xcel did not have time to review the law enforcement analyses, but yet they reject the law enforcement analyses that they did not view. It sounds like they reject the conclusion that their line sparked part of the fire, and they're not really interested in any analyses that would contradict their view.
No, and they point out the coal seam fire, or the coal seams that are burning underneath where this is. Again, investigators pointed out that they said this is a probable cause, but they could not rule out the coal seams. They're just saying it's not the coal seams and that this was more likely the cause. Legal language that Xcel will use in these class action lawsuits, or the attempt of a class action lawsuit, to say, hey, investigators even say they cannot say for certain we were the reason.
Marshall Zellinger, thank you for your reporting on this. That video of the Xcel lines, again, not released by the sheriff's office. We found it through our exhaustive investigation of every known video of the first hours of the fire. Our Chris Vanderveen and photojournalist Chris Hansen spent months going through these videos, pinpointing the time and the location. You can see the largest database of videos of the Marshall Fire at marshallfiremap.com. You can go minute by minute through that fire spread. So we're still working to figure out how those ongoing class action suits against Xcel are going to affect customers, not just there in Boulder County, but across the state potentially. It is very significant that we learned today that Xcel is not going to face criminal liability. Consider what happened in California, where the utility Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, has been found criminally liable for several fires. In 2020, PG&E pleaded guilty to 84 counts of manslaughter after faulty equipment sparked the 2018 Camp Fire. PG&E has paid out billions of dollars in settlements. I want to bring in our former colleague Brandon Ritteman now. Brandon works for our sister station out in Sacramento, and he has done the definitive reporting on PG&E's responsibility for fires in California. Brandon, welcome back first of all. I want to ask you, what did it take to get to the point that you had a utility company held criminally liable for people's deaths?
Yeah, so really what happened was investigators, Kyle, and it is good to be speaking with you again. What happened was investigators took a look at the evidence. They sealed it off with crime scene tape. This was after the Camp Fire in 2018 that destroyed the town of Paradise. Put armed guards down at the base of this dirt road and said nobody comes in here until we've had a look at the evidence. So that's a stark distinction between what you're dealing with and what happened out here. But when they got a look at the evidence, they saw there was a hook that was holding up this really high tension transmission line that had worn down over decades to the point where there's just a little thin nub of metal left. And basically they were able to work up a case to build to criminal negligence, showing that the company, not any specific individual at PG&E that they could put behind bars, but the company, the corporation itself, knew about this problem, knew that it created a high risk of injury or death, and then went ahead with these practices anyway of not properly inspecting and maintaining its system. And PG&E ultimately did plead guilty as charged to the 84 counts of felony involuntary manslaughter as well as reckless arson.
And Brandon, so in this case, as Marshall was just talking about, Xcel went out, took the lead on equipment repairs following the fire, so investigators never got a first-hand look like they did after the Camp Fire. Given what has happened out in California as a result of your reporting and public awareness about it, is it changing the way that that utility operates? Obviously, we know that the wildfire risk in California is still very significant.
Yeah, I mean, they've made certainly a lot of announcements about trying to prevent wildfires in the future, but the reality is that PG&E power lines have been named as the cause of a large destructive fire every year since, going all the way back to 2017, including the mosquito fire last year, at least, is under investigation by the U.S. Forest Service, and parts have been seized. So it is an ongoing problem at PG&E, and critics would say that the company really hasn't owned up to this core fundamental problem of putting profits over safety. And I got to say, on this Xcel thing, I think the fact that investigators didn't get in there and really get their hands on any of this evidence for a couple of weeks until after the snow had fallen and then melted away, really, it leads to a botched result. There are going to be questions that just aren't going to be answered, and that's the real tragedy in this.
Well, we are happy to pick up that baton and take it from there. Wish you was under better circumstances, but Brandon Ritteman, it is good to see you again and appreciate your expertise as always. Thank you, my friend.